It's the opening Saturday in November. It's the start of the final month of the college football regular season. It's week number 10. Live right here on College Football Today on SportsGrid. He is the mastermind of the college football pigskin. That is Joe Lisi. He is OK Dubs. That is Kevin Walsh. And I am Ben Stevens. It is week number 10, the first weekend in November. This is where things get interesting. We are just days away from the first unveiling of the college football playoff rankings. The first time the selection committee will tell us how they see the country in the 12-team era. So, Joe, in this final month of the regular season, the impetus and the importance on these marquee matchups, it intensifies even more.
It does, and we have a top 10 battle in Happy Valley with Penn State and Ohio State. We have Oregon and Michigan that'll battle it out. This 12 o'clock window is very good, Kev. We'll see how it plays out. Division titles, college football playoff appearances are on the line.
No doubt about it. I'm glad you mentioned that we're going to get the first look from the committee. It's their first time where their rankings beyond probably 10th are relevant, and I want to see how they adjust to it. Continuity is going to matter. Again, I hate that they do this. I think it is a detriment. I think they'd be better off copying the college basketball model, quite frankly, where they give it to us all in one unveiling, because what this will do is set the bar. If by chance they go out there and put BYU behind a Clemson, for example, or a Notre Dame or a Texas A&M, which is all certainly plausible, the Cougs then may not control their own destiny outside of the auto bid that we know is available. Just one example that we were going to see things get somewhat put in place with these committee rankings.
It is a very good point, Kevin. In the 10-year history of the 4-team format, there was not necessarily year-over-year annual justification for what data points mattered most. Was it conference championships? Was it head-to-head? Was it strength of schedule and resume? We are about to find out in the CFP rankings on Tuesday night. A night filled with debate and some angry folks, I am sure. But factoring into that equation, we go back quickly to Friday. Boise State ranked 15th in the country, winning 56-24 over San Diego State. Joe, it wasn't all Ashton Genty, but he did come to life in the second half, nearly $150 on the ground and 2 scores. Boise State still has the best price of any team from a Group of 5 conference to reach the college football playoff in firm control of the Mountain West. But, Joe, there are 6 teams that enter this opening Saturday in November with a minus 600 price or better to see the college football playoff. And 2 of them square off on this Saturday. The noon Eastern time kick in State College, Pennsylvania. It's a top 5 tilt. It's our College Football Today game of the week. It's number 3 Penn State, number 4 Ohio State. The Buckeyes, a 3.5-point road favorite. That total of 47 and a hook is on the rise. It is a focus on Happy Valley, where, Joe, the narrative will reign supreme on this opening Saturday in November. Ryan Day is 2-6 straight up against AP top 5 opponents in his tenure in Columbus. James Franklin on the other side for the Penn Staters, 1-9 against the Buckeyes, just 3-17 outright against AP top 10 foes. How are you factoring into your handicap the narrative entering Saturday?
Well, both coaches need this win, right? Ryan Day and James Franklin, they really need to step up and really solidify their top billing in the Big Ten right now. You look at Penn State, I think they could afford a loss, but Ohio State would have their backs against the wall with the 1-point loss on the road to Oregon, so they really need to play hard. They got pushed to the limit last week by Matt Rule in Nebraska. What were they, double-digit 20-point favorites in that matchup, and they were on life support in the fourth quarter. We saw Penn State, Drew Aller goes out in the first half. Second half, it was a 4-quarter game. They pull away from Wisconsin. But again, you look at the series perspective, Kev. Ohio State has won 7 straight. They've won the last 4 by an average margin of 10.7 points per game. They won last year 20-12. This is the lowest spread that we've seen in the series over the last 8 meetings. So we'll see how it plays out. Rushing attacks will be critical for both teams. I do give the inside track to Penn State because they're playing at home.
It's interesting because you're right to bring up the low nature of the spread, though last year's number was
4.5, yeah.
And that was at Ohio State. So kind of, again, year over year, this would actually suggest that there's been a gap widened by Ohio State, which is preseason 100% what everybody would think.
Yeah.
Is it how we feel in season? I think that's the tricky thing about this football game is the Ohio State sample size is tough to navigate. It is mostly useless depending on how you view Iowa. I think that their win against the Hawkeyes is pretty solid. The loss to Oregon is nothing to be upset about.
Yeah.
The number one ranked team in the country, almost unanimously, you lose by 1 on the road. But if Ohio State loses here today, small, are we sure that they should just be automatically in when there are a number of unbeaten football teams, much less the one-loss teams, that are currently ranked behind them, Ben?
You see that price, minus 850 for Ohio State to reach the college football playoff. It's the 4th best number out of any team in the country to get to the CFP. Kev, Ohio State has been favored in all 7 games this year, just 3-4 against the spread. They've only been favored by 17 points or less once. It was against Oregon, also on the road, laying about a field goal in a top 5 tilt. They lost that game outright. Penn State has been favored in all 7 of its contests so far this season. An underdog only 30 times, and now 11 years under James Franklin. Just 15-15 ATS and only 7 outright wins. They are looking for that outright win in this marquee and significant spot on this Saturday. But when Penn State has not been expected to win a football game, Kev, over the last few years, they have faltered. How does that, if you believe it is possible, change today in State College?
So I think everybody right now is hoping that, this is the Andel Total Nicky game. He's going to open this thing up. My problem, though, is now some books are hanging Drew Aller numbers like he's fine.
Right.
Others are not willing to hang the Drew Aller props. And what does that mean if the Penn State quarterback is a little bit banged up? It makes this tricky for me, considering I'm not fully sold on Drew Aller still. I'm becoming a little bit more sold on Will Howard, though. Will Howard's been excellent so far in Big Ten competition. And again, considering he's played Iowa and Oregon, I don't think we can pretend that's irrelevant. He's completing well over 75% of his passes through those 4 games, 250 passing yards per game, 14 total touchdowns to just 3 interceptions. What I've seen from Will Howard is not just a quarterback who looks good enough to win with this roster, but a quarterback, Lisi, who is currently 100-1 to win the Heisman Trophy. Well, we know that Dylan Gabriel's main argument is, I'm the number 1 team in the country. A win here for Ohio State, they will be barreling towards a rematch with the Ducks. Again, I haven't placed the wager. I'm a little interested in Will Howard, of course, though he needs to win and play well today.
Yeah, he has a big performance. He's going to be there. Has the opportunity in terms of a 12 o'clock kick right in front of everybody's eyes on the road. He's played well. The first game against Oregon, put up numbers, just couldn't close it out in the final minute of that matchup. 17 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, over 1,700 yards. He's also mobile and is plus 185 to hit pay dirt today. So we'll see how that situation plays out. The main concern for me, guys, is the rushing attack of Ohio State. Statistically very good, but you look at last week, they were under their average of about 141 2 weeks ago. Last week it was like 64. They need a much better effort. This game, they need to be in the area of about 180, 190 to take the pressure off of Will Howard today.
They're averaging 188 yards per game. It's still 4th best in the Big Ten, but by Ohio State standards, with that talented backfield, along with the athletic Will Howard, organized and orchestrated in an offensive scheme by Chip Kelly, you would expect better. Just 2.1 yards per pop last week against Nebraska. That was the worst for a Buckeyes rushing attack in at least the last decade. Nebraska's good up front. Penn State is even better. The Nittany Lions have an elite defense this year under Tom Allen again. We are expecting Drew Aller to play in this game. Last week, injured late in the opening half against Wisconsin. He was 14 of 18 for nearly $150 and a touchdown before he exited. The completion percentage this year for Aller, more than 71%. Plenty more from State College throughout this show, but another Big Ten battle in the Big House up next.
has fixed that hitch. He now shoots it at the top of his jump. His release is really pure. And right now he's shooting it at 49% from three. Now, I'm not saying he can shoot at 49% from three for the season. But if he's at 42.3%, Lord have mercy, look out below. Jason Tatum, right now, my number 6 player in the NBA.
Betting above the rim. Only on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
Welcome back to College Football Today, live right here on this opening Saturday in November on SportsGrid. A top 5 tilt in Happy Valley between number 3 Penn State and number 4 Ohio State. But the number 1 team in the country for a second consecutive week also resides in the Big Ten. That's Oregon. The Ducks on the road on this Saturday afternoon, visiting Ann Arbor and the reigning national champs of Michigan. And Kev, you look at the spread for this game, it is more than 2 touchdowns in favor of the Ducks. The third time this year that Michigan, the reigning national title winners, will be booked as an underdog inside the Big House. The 4th time overall this season, the Maize and Blue have been booked as a dog. Is it a deserving number in favor of Oregon on the road today?
I believe so. What I would say to you is I don't have any issues with this number. If it was under 14.5, I think I'd have to start to look towards the Ducks winning this game by 2 touchdowns. If this thing was 17.5, certainly if it was in the 21 range, then okay, I would start to look towards Michigan here. But the Wolverines did a great job winning against Michigan State in that matchup. We talked about the spread math heading into that game where the books completely sold on the Wolverines. But, all of a sudden they get a little bit of a bounce back here. I think Oregon is tricky, man. The Ducks defensively have done a phenomenal job. The only team that's thrown a passing touchdown against them in Big Ten play was Ohio State. Yeah. What does that say about the Big Ten, or what does that say about Oregon's defense? But again, is Michigan back on QB4, QB1 with Davis Warren? Do they really have the chops here to change that? And I think, just to add this quickly, Joe, it's funny, but we're looking at this as, can Michigan cover? I am not, and I don't know if you are, I am not looking at this as, can Michigan pull off their win of the season? I don't think it's on the board.
Yeah, I think it's a long shot, but you can never say never in terms of college football. The one reason why I would buy in, Kev, to saying Michigan potentially could strike the upset, they still only have 1 home loss in 3 years. You have the number 1 ranked team in the country coming into your house, right? So that is always, from an emotional standpoint, added intensity for the home team. And they are the defending national champs, whether you want to buy into that or not, different type of roster. But, they need to run the football to be in this matchup. The one thing that I have been impressed with from Oregon is after they get the victory over Ohio State, they then pound Purdue and cover. Yep. They pound a very good Illinois team that was catching 21.5. They beat them, by double digits. They put up 500 total yards of offense, 298 through the air, another 200 on the ground, and they contained Luke Altmaier in that rushing attack as well, held them to a $132. They were in long third down situations throughout the day. We know this is going to be a difficult effort for Michigan's offense. The way that they could stay within this number, run the football, get it to a four-quarter game, win the turnover battle. It's a tough ask, but the more that this plays out throughout the day, I'm starting to like the points with Michigan. I did take Donovan Edwards for 60+, and I think he hits paid there today at plus 240.
Fourth game as a dog this year for the Maize in Blue. Third time as a home underdog in the Big House this season. Only 5 total times in the 9 years under Jim Harbaugh was Michigan a home underdog. Only once in the last 3 seasons prior to this campaign. That was at the end of 2021 in the game at home against Ohio State. Now, Lisi, guy, we talked about the Ducks early in this season. They did not cover in their first 2 Big Ten games. They have covered in their last 3. In 4 of their 5 Big Ten contests, they have held the opposing offense to 300 yards or less. Ohio State, the only one to go over that margin. And, of course, the Buckeyes offense still very, very solid. And when you look at what this defense has done up front, on the other side of the football is key as well. Dillon Gabriel sacked 7 times in the opening 2 games of this year, just 3 times in the last 6. And Dillon Gabriel, Joe, enters this Saturday against the Wolverines with a passing yards prop of 274 and a hook, and the second best price to win a Heisman Trophy. What does Oregon's offense need to do to win this game comfortably in Ann Arbor?
Push tempo. They're averaging 300 passing yards per game. They were able to push tempo against Ohio State, get that game into the 30s. You get this game into the 30s, it's lights out, I believe, for Michigan and Davis Warren. The only way that they could be in this matchup, I think a 24-20 type of game, 21-17, low-scoring, sustained drives. If Dillon Gabriel goes off and throws for 298 and 2 or 3 touchdowns, going to be lights out. That'll open up the rushing attack for Jordan James. We've seen this back end, too, of Oregon right now, only giving up 173 passing yards per game. The only game that they were really exploited was with Will Howard and those playmakers on the outside. We know that up until this point, Michigan hasn't done that or has shown that, exhibited that throughout the season. So if you're Michigan, you have to take some shots to open up the rushing attack. Tough ask, but I still like the points with the home dog.
For me, I'm really wondering if Michigan can kind of be the pride of the Big Ten here. We talked about Texas, right, and all the hype they were getting. Yeah. They hadn't played a real SEC game, in my opinion. Georgia was like, hey, by the way, this is what we do here. Texas will be fine. Oregon is walking through this conference. Yeah. Not that the Ohio State game wasn't difficult, but they come out ahead. I mean, they're about to show up to the Big Ten and rip off this unbeaten conference. Let's not forget, year after year in the prior format, the Pac-12 is a joke. Yeah, we were always at, hey, 2 SEC teams, way before we would think about a Pac-12 team here. I wonder if Michigan can step up, but on the other side of it, and this is where I understand why people love Dan Lanning. His approach makes you feel like he's like, oh, yeah, I'm going to beat your head in. Yeah. I want to let you know that I'm here. I'm the new team. It's how we run the Big Ten. That's the type of vibe you get off of Lanning. I want to make this other quick point, though. Please. My favorite bet I've seen so far this year is Evan Stewart, 40-plus receiving yards. Simple bounce-back spot coming off of a catch for 19 yards last game. Evan Stewart in their 2 big games this year, Ohio State, Boise State, 12 catches, 261 yards, and a touchdown in both games. And Michigan's pass defense, something you pointed out throughout this season, not the same as last year. Love Evan Stewart to blast through 40-plus.
The Wolverines were the best defense in the country last year, allowing just over 10 points per game. This year, they're giving up 21.5 points per game. It's 7th worst in the Big Ten. Oregon has been playing so much better football in these last covers, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I'm surprised we didn't get a danger man shout out. 6 carries, 64 yards, and Paydirt last week. Season high first rushing score.
Here's the thing. I know everyone thought I was messing around. He is undeniably their best option at quarterback, and Sharon Moore has messed this up all season and tanked their year.
Davis Warren, 123 yards last week and a touchdown. Colston Loveland, 67 of that. He has been their best player this season. More on college football today, next.
has fixed that hitch. He now shoots it at the top of his jump, his release is really pure. And right now he's shooting it at 49% from three. Now, I'm not saying he's going to shoot at 49% from three for the season. But if he's at 42, 43%, Lord have mercy, look out below. Jason Tatum, right now, my number 6 player in the NBA.
Betting above the rim. Only on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
So with all eyes on the top 5 tilt in-state college between number 3 Penn State and number 4 Ohio State, and now entering the final month of this regular season in college football, we thought it was worth our time looking at the Big Ten title odds, knowing that Oregon has a tough test on the road in Ann Arbor as well. As you look at those best prices, you will see 4 numbers, 3 that are very tightly contested, 1 a little bit further back, and then the rest of this 18-team conference known as the Big Ten. Oregon is undefeated. They enter this weekend as the favorite to win the Big Ten championship at plus 110. Ohio State back by just over half a buck at plus 165. Penn State a 4-1 number. And there is Indiana. The Hoosiers also perfect in not just Big Ten, but all of their play this year at 14-1. Lisi guy, of course, when you look at Oregon, here is the remaining schedule for the Ducks. A road trip today to Michigan. On the road after that in Camp Randall against Wisconsin. A bye, and then they end at home against Washington in the rivalry that continues over from the Pac-12. Of course, Dan Lanning has never beaten the Huskies in his 2 years in Eugene. Does it feel fitting to you to see the Ducks as the short favorite to win the Big Ten entering the month of November?
Absolutely. And the only game outside of this one that I would say is a roadblock is the rivalry game, just because it's Washington and they hate each other. It's one of the hated rivalries in college football. From an offensive perspective, I don't think Wisconsin's going to provide much with Braden Locke. So they have to get through today. I think it's clear sailing in regards to that, and there's no doubt, in my opinion, that Oregon would be in the Big Ten championship game in a couple of weeks.
Well, Oregon is minus 900 on a book to make the title game. Yep. So, having the tiebreaker of Ohio State, they absolutely, all signs point to them being there. What is still bothersome to me, we talked about this a few times, but preseason, I expected Bama to beat Georgia, and I was hoping I'd be able to bet a Georgia national title ticket in season. Mm-hmm. Check. I was expecting Oregon to beat Ohio State, and I'd bet Ohio State to win the Big Ten in season. Well, halfway there. Yeah. The Ohio State number is truly preposterous.
Yeah.
The Buckeyes are minus 115 to make the title game. Okay. Again, they still have to win today's game. The Indiana one is tricky, but still, minus 115 to make it, plus 165 to win it. Again, Oregon is minus 900 to make it, and plus 105 to win it. If we get the favorites and we get Ohio State and Oregon in a rematch, I think the books are telling us that not only will Ohio State be favored in the game, they're not going to have that team laying any less than 5-6 points in that rematch there, which is, Again, pretty incredible to see here considering the way things are lining up right now.
Let's think about last year. In the final year of the Pac-12, the Ducks were a slight favorite in Seattle in the regular season matchup against UW, and then were a 9.5-point favorite for the Pac-12 title game in Las Vegas. Of course, that Washington won outright. Kev, I think it's a touchdown if these two teams play each other in Indianapolis.
Wild.
I think it's Ohio State laying 6.5 or 7. It would be that based on the odds that we see. Now, Ohio State's remaining schedule after today, they have Purdue, a road trip to Northwestern, second to last Saturday against Indiana at home, and then the rivalry game that is the game. Kev, you made this point last week as Penn State headed to Camp Randall to take on Wisconsin. That game actually more impactful, despite the headlines in the narrative, than this week's game against Ohio State. Because if Penn State loses today, all right, they've got one loss. Maybe they don't reach the Big Ten championship, but their college football playoff lives still very much there. Home game against Washington, road trips to Purdue and Minnesota before they end the year back in state college against Maryland. Penn State might lose this game today, and even if that's the case and they run their Final Four, the Nittany Lions are in the college football playoff more than likely.
Yeah, 100%. I actually think, incredibly, the team that we have to try and figure out, if Ohio State loses today, but beats Indiana, neither team makes the Big Ten title game. 10-2 Buckeyes, 11-1 Hoosiers. How the committee handles that?
Well, Indiana still would have the inside track because wouldn't Ohio State have 2 conference losses and Indiana would have 1?
Correct, but Penn State more than likely.
It would probably be Penn State, Oregon, but I'm talking about how they would
there would be some time. I mean, it's intriguing. I think if Ohio State loses today, they're done. I mean, in terms of the conference, I think.
Oh yeah,
stick a fork in them, and then what would that line be if they ever faced Oregon?
And here's what's on tap for IU: a road trip to East Lansing against Michigan State today. We'll break down that game in just a little bit. They then host Michigan. They'd be booked as a favorite in that one. Bye-week road trip to Ohio State. They end the year against Purdue. The world's largest outdoor cocktail party. Next.
Has fixed that hitch. He now shoots it at the top of his jump. His release is really pure. And right now he's shooting it at 49% from 3. Now, I'm not saying he's going to shoot at 49% from 3 for the season. But if he's at 42.3%, Lord have mercy, look out below. Jason Tatum, right now, my number 6 player in the NBA.
Betting above the rim. Only on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
Rivalry weekend to start off November in Jacksonville. It's the world's largest outdoor cocktail party between number 2 Georgia and Florida. The 103rd all-time meeting between the Bulldogs and the Gators. And what a game it is going to be. A game where a rivalry runs so deep that whether it's Athens, Gainesville, Jacksonville, or here in Homedale, New Jersey, inside our SportsGrid studios, it can get a little bit intense and heated, as it did just a few weeks ago, talking about Georgia's outlook the remainder of the year and what would happen in this matchup against the Gators.
I'll just say this for Georgia right now. They lose this game today. I think they don't make the playoff. I'll say
You're
that.
Nuts.
I don't.
They'll walk in backwards. They could lose out. They'll make the playoff. You're nuts. You're nuts.
I'm serious.
You're nuts. You're totally shocked.
I'm serious. They lose today.
If they lose today, you got them losing again?
Possibly, yeah. Maybe Florida. Why not? It's a rivalry game. It could happen. Why not?
Maybe Florida.
Why not?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah. Tell you what. Leave the other books alone.
No.
Call me.
Yeah?
I'll take the action.
All right.
I'll
We'll
take
make
the
it on
money
the
line
side.
action.
We'll make it on the side.
Yeah, that's
we'll
no
make
problem.
it on the side.
That's no problem.
We will.
Cocktail party, man.
So, man in the risk room, and odds maker Kevin Walsh. The number is 14.5 in many spots in favor of UGA. What's your book setting it at, and have you been taking any action?
I keep this here at all times. I told him, give me a call.
No phone. Just the tin can with the rope.
Can
Goes
I
right
say
to your house.
what is so funny about that whole thing, though, right, is Georgia just beat Texas. Like, it didn't matter. And you were on Georgia in the game anyway, too, right? Which is why that whole thing was so.
I wanted the dance, though. We should have saved it for the dance.
They did chop that. Well, maybe we'll bring that back for the Clemson-Louisville game when we get there. I think the funny thing with this, and the reason why I felt I reacted that way to talking about Georgia missing is Georgia went into the Texas game, and it was like, man, they better prove it. And by the end of the game, it's like, oh, never mind. They're exactly who they always are. Best team in the country, ranked number 1 in Ben's top 10, favorites to win a national championship. We'll break the game. We'll break the game down today, but I imagine we'll find out in 10 seconds. You don't actually think they're going to lose today to Florida?
I think it'll be a game, but we'll see. And again, I did bet Georgia in that matchup. They held Texas to 1.1 yards per carry and less than 30 yards on the ground in that matchup. The one concern I did have, they had a 23-0 halftime lead against Texas. Before Texas could blink, they were down by double digits. The one concern I have coming into this ballgame, and I've brought it up on continuous shows with you, Ben, is Carson Beck has been a little bit turnover prone. Only threw 175 yards in that Texas game, 3 interceptions. We've seen critical interceptions in big games, especially at the end against Alabama. That can't be in terms of a rivalry game. They've won 3 straight by an average margin of victory of 24 points per game, dominated last year 43-20. They have the weapons, they have the defense, but this is a team in Florida that's playing with house money. They get the victory a couple weeks ago in dominating fashion over Kentucky. They put up 48 points. Lagway is a mobile quarterback, right? That's the one thing that Milroe gave that defense fits in the first half. Maybe some new wrinkles. I think they're going to be in this number because Napier's back is against the wall. The extra week rivalry game, I'll take the points. Georgia might win, but Florida covers.
And Georgia has not been a great cover team this year. 1-5 against the spread as the favored side, and of course an outright victory as an underdog for the first time in over 3 seasons. In that matchup in Austin, the last time we saw UGA against Texas. In fact, in both of the 2 covers for the Bulldogs this year, it has been that defensive intensity that has won the day. Both of those games staying under. Georgia under in 5 of 7. But, Kev, there's a defense on the other side in the Gators that has also stepped up the last 3 games. We haven't seen Florida since a couple of weekends ago, and an outright win against Kentucky. We'll talk about the Cats as a favorite in SEC play in just a little bit. But, Kev, it's been that defense for the Gators, allowing 23 points or less in these last 3 games as an underdog in all 3 covers. This will be the 6th time in 8 games total that UF has been booked as an underdog this season. Did not cover in its first 2 against Miami and Texas A&M, 2 top 10 teams. They have covered in 3 straight, including on the road in Knoxville against Tennessee. How do you feel about this 2-touchdown spread in this game that has worked a little bit to Florida throughout this week.
Yeah, Florida's getting a lot of respect here. They've lost this game under Napier 43-20 and 42-20. So make no bones about it. This is a team that last game out caught points at home from Kentucky. So this number, again, at 14.5, shines favorably on them. Let's not forget, while Florida all of a sudden it feels like they're having a much better year than projected, this upcoming 4 games was supposed to be 5, to be fair, but 4 games is the run of torture. Georgia, Texas, LSU, Ole Miss. Now, if you're Napier, win one of those games, beat FSU because, well, that's what everybody does this year. 6 wins in bowl eligibility, the guy might get a contract extension. I mean, with the way that this has been going. And if you are Florida, who ironically feels more interesting in the game because, again, I think Georgia's just back to ho-hum, thanks for showing up. We'll win this game between 10 and 24 points, and that's going to be the story here. DJ Lagway is someone that they were obviously so excited to have in their building.
Right.
And it didn't take more than 2 quarters against the Miami Hurricanes for people to wonder where that kid was going to play college football once they got rid of Billy Napier. Well, if they can keep Napier, that then means they can keep Lagway, and how valuable that is, we might find out today. DJ Lagway's performances are eerily similar to Anthony Richardson's NFL performances, if anything more so than the college ones. The completion percentage is not gorgeous, but the yards per pass attempt is. It's 11.9. Jackson Dart's the top dog at around 11 or so. But the difference between Dart and Lagway is that Lagway's yards per completion is nearly 20. Dart is around 15.
Yeah.
So it's not just, again, it's deep shot. Well, we saw some deep shot success for Alabama and Milroe. I know that is quite the comparison to make with what Ryan Williams provides, but I do think that you're going to see Lagway continuously take shots against the Georgia secondary and get through a very low number of 190.5.
190.5 is that price, and Kev on display in the home matchup a couple of weekends ago against Kentucky. 7 of 14 for 259 yards and an interception, 46 yards on the ground. The Gators are expecting to see Montrell Johnson Jr. back. He was injured late in the matchup now 3 weekends ago against Tennessee. Jaden Baugh, well, if Lagway did not throw a touchdown against Kentucky and Florida scored 48 points, how did they score so much? Jaden Baugh had 5 rushing touchdowns, the freshman from Atlanta, over 100 yards on the ground against a good Cats rush defense as well. And, Joe, you made this point in comparison to Jalen Milroe. DJ Lagway is not that yet, but we saw Milroe expose the top half of that Georgia secondary, and he utilized his athleticism against this Georgia defense as well. Lagway has some of that.
Yeah, and that's why I believe the off week will benefit Florida more than Georgia, right? Georgia will get healthy. They're not going to change their MO. They have an identity offensively and defensively. But for the underdog, this is an opportunity to put in different wrinkles that maybe that Georgia defense hasn't seen and utilize Lagway in terms of his athleticism. Again, that's what I would do, and hopefully that's what the Florida Gators do in this matchup, Kev.
If you are Georgia, though, let's not pretend that this is the toughest remaining game. As much as I said, this is all ho-hum. It's followed up by going to Ole Miss and hosting Tennessee.
Right.
If Georgia shows cracks today, again, they're not losing this game, but if they show cracks in this matchup here, well, then all of a sudden you wonder if Ole Miss could get their biggest win under Lane Kiffin, or if Tennessee can figure out how offense works before it hits halftime. Maybe we'll figure that out today a little bit as well.
$175 and 3 interceptions in Austin for Carson Beck. 8 touchdowns, but to 8 INTs in his 5 SEC games. Trevor Etienne, his best game in a UGA uniform against the Longhorns, 87 yards on the ground and 3 rushing scores. Florida has won outright in 2 of its last 3 games as a dog, both at home, only 3-11 away from Gainesville under Billy Napier. A huge Saturday in the ACC. Next.
has fixed that hitch. He now shoots it at the top of his jump, his release is really pure. And right now he's shooting it at 49% from three. Now, I'm not saying he's going to shoot at 49% from three for the season. But if he's at 42, 43%, Lord have mercy, look out below. Jason Tatum, right now, my number 6 player in the NBA.
Betting above the rim. Only on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
This opening Saturday in November is a critical one in the ACC. We start in Clemson, South Carolina, with a matchup between the Tigers and the Cardinals of Louisville. Clemson has won 6 straight games since dropping its season opener in disastrous fashion against Georgia. But in this 6-game win streak, Clemson has looked like a top 10, top 15 team in the country. It's a double-digit spread, Joe, in favor of the Tigers as they host Louisville today. In this 6-game win streak, Clemson is covered in 4 of those 6. The average margin of victory north of 27 points per game. But to Kevin's point last week, the Tigers' strength of schedule, which includes the opener against the Bulldogs, is 75th in the country to this point of the season. So it should be an elevated test against Louisville. How does Clemson handle it?
Well, they have dominated Louisville in recent years. They've won all 8 meetings, 8 straight heading into this matchup in the series dating back to 2014. And you talk about the dominance at home, 4-0 this year. They've won those 4 games by an average margin of victory of 28.4 points per game. The only game that they didn't cover was a couple of weeks ago where they won by 17, 48-31 over Virginia as basically a 20.5-point favorite. But I do believe in Louisville traveling in terms of this situation. Jeff Brom is an underdog. Last game they played, they trailed by double digits in Chestnut Hill, pull out the 31-27 victory. Tyler Shuck playing very well. They're averaging well over 250 passing yards per game. They can run it with Isaac Brown, and they have the big 3. Isaac Brown, Ja'Cory Brooks, that has well over 700 receiving yards on the year. They could stretch Clemson over the top. I'll say this from the offensive perspective. This is the most lethal offense Clemson's placed in terms of the schedule. I'm taking the 10.5 points. I don't know if Louisville wins, but I like Jeff Brom in this spot.
And that's what I was waiting for. That's what I was waiting for, because you know this Clemson stuff.
Well, wait a second.
It's a little fraudulent.
We're week to week. That's what makes college football so great. We gauged it when we had that discussion. Clemson was hitting on all cylinders. Put a 10.5 spot in front of me with Louisville, I'm taking the points.
Clemson still is hitting on all cylinders since that conversation, as they had an open weekend last Saturday. But, Kev, now to you.
Okay, just to be clear. And again, I love you to death, okay? When we had the conversation, they were hitting on also. Since that conversation, they played a game. They scored 48, and it beat UVA by 17. So what? So
I picked UVA in that game. I said they would keep it close.
So you've been fading this Clemson team because you know it's not that real.
I just said they're deserving of the ranking.
Virginia did cover. The 2 non-covers for Clemson in this 6-game win streak, it's come by a total of 4 points. Louisville been a dog twice this year, 0-2 against the spread, but against Notre Dame and Miami, those were both under a touchdown. Louisville lost each of those games by only a touchdown.
Yeah, look, I think when you navigate a touch of spread math here, I don't find the number to be disgraceful. Listen, Clemson, Notre Dame, we can do the comparison, but there's been a lot that's played out since when Louisville went to Notre Dame. I also think that the books were still trying to figure out the Irish a little bit. And again, they are presenting like an absolute wagon right now in South Bend, quite frankly. But when I went into this game, it was not going to just be eyes closed, let's get Louisville and move on. Yeah. I wondered if the bye week was going to tell me anything, because that's what Clemson has. Again, we were talking about a little during the break. For the second time this year, they're off bye. They did get the first win and cover against NC State. NC State is also atrocious. Yeah. One of the biggest underachievers of this college football season. For sure. Heading into the year, 0-3 against the number in their last 3 games, in the last 3 seasons off bye, with 2 outright losses, both as a favorite. They've been favored in all the games. Now, they were all on the road. At Cuse, at Notre Dame. I don't remember the third one, but it was another outright loss for Clemson. I just view it as a situation where Louisville can stay inside this number, but because some almost baseball-esque, I don't know if Clemson needed a break, because that offense was rolling so crisp. So you turn a Clemson game on, oh, look at that. They have 24 points midway through the second quarter. I think that Louisville here has also shown the ability to hang offensively. Just look at the Miami game, for example.
Yeah, absolutely so. Louisville has gone over in both of its games as an underdog this year. A very stout Louisville defense a year ago in year number 1 under Jeff Brom. Not nearly as good this year. They have gone over in 6 of 8 games. They allowed at least 27 points in 3 of their last 4. So it is important to pay attention to that. Clemson's defense, which had been carrying the water for a struggling offense the last few seasons, also not nearly as elite, giving up nearly 350 yards of offense per game. 7th in the ACC. They were the best total defense each of the past 3 seasons, even last year when they won only 4 ACC games. And Tyler Shuck is an intriguing quarterback. He's had a long road through college football, Oregon, to Texas Tech, now in his 7th year at Louisville. At least 264 yards over his number today in 6 of the 7 games the Cards have played against FBS competition. Kev, in the last 4 ACC games, 3 times Shuck has thrown for at least 329 yards against SMU, Miami, and Boston College. If Louisville is going to keep this game to within double digits, Tyler Shuck going to be a big reason why.
Goes right over the 1.5 passing touchdowns as well, most likely. Clemson is giving up an outrageous amount of passing touchdowns, maybe because teams are trailing. UVA had multiple quarterbacks throw 2+ passing touchdowns against them. So did Wake Forest. Florida State, Brock Glenn threw 2 scores on this team.
It's an up-and-comer.
Oh, my goodness. In fact, we have seen almost every single team throw multiple passing touchdowns against them. I think it's every single power opponent has thrown multiple passing touchdowns. The only quarterback who didn't was actually Joey Aguiar. Yeah. But again, Again, we had a debate about this loosely last week that we're going to get into, you don't know it yet, more this week, about what a team we thought was going to be going in and then reevaluating. When Clemson beat App State the way that they did, it was like, whoa, awesome. App State's terrible. App State's bad. Like, those are the adjustments that we have to make there. So, again, that is, to me, a reason why I'm willing to take Louisville in this spot, because this is very clearly the toughest test that they've had since they started to play good football.
I'll just say this. If there's one team that could play up-tempo and get this game into the 40s, it's Louisville. Did it with Miami.
62.5 is that total. The Clemson offense has been elite in this 6-game win streak. 40-plus in 5 of the 6 victories, averaging 48.5 points per game. That would be the best in college football. An unbeaten battle in the ACC. Next.
has fixed that hitch. He now shoots it at the top of his jump. His release is really pure. And right now he's shooting it at 49% from three. Now, I'm not saying he's going to shoot at 49% from three for the season. But if he's at 42.3%, Lord have mercy, look out below. Jason Tatum, right now, my number 6 player in the NBA.
Betting above the rim. Only on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
On this opening Saturday of November in the 2024 college football season, there are only two ranked versus ranked top 25 matchups. A top 5 tilt in Happy Valley between number 3 Penn State and number 4 Ohio State. In this top 20 showdown, incredibly important in the heart of Texas, we head to Dallas for an ACC affair between SMU and Pitt. The Panthers, number 18 in the country, not only perfect in ACC play, but perfect all year long. Undefeated at 7-0 for the first time since 1982. SMU has one loss to BYU that has aged a lot better than we expected in the opening month of the season. And from there, has won 5 straight, including all 4 of its first ACC games. Kev, to the heart of Dallas, to the heart of ACC country we go. SMU more than a touchdown favorite in this matchup against Pitt. Total working its way down ever so slightly, 56.5 as of this Saturday morning. Where do you start your breakdown?
Yeah, I started by typing in the We Don't Believe You Bowl because nobody believes that either of these teams are legitimate threats, but the winner will feel exactly that, especially if you look at SMU because the runway is right in front of them. The one loss did come to BYU, which at the time felt disastrous, and look, that's not going to be the case. The Cougars could lose out, quite frankly, and it's still not going to look like some massive black eye on the resume. And in the fact that they've kind of shift quarterbacks around and then they get a little bit of extra grace. Not only winning here, what would remain, Joe, is home against Boston College, at UVA, at Cal. What kind of tiebreakers do we need to figure out in the ACC? Because unless Pitt pulls off this upset here, it's hard to see SMU losing another game, Joe.
No, it's not. And think about the game that they did lose to undefeated BYU when they're building 18-15. People wrote them off from that point, and they've regrouped. It started with the dominant home win over Florida State in the early part of the year. Once they got that victory, they had confidence, and they've been ripping off wins, including last week 28-27 over Duke and Malik Murphy. That game goes right down to the wire. They run for 211 yards on that ground. That was a very good Duke front seven up until that point. The one concern I have now, both quarterbacks will play, Holstein for Pitt and Jennings for SMU. Jennings a little turnover prone last week, 3 interceptions. Both of these teams, from a defensive perspective, Ben, mirror each other. Pitt giving up 2.5 yards per carry. SMU only 2.7 yards per rush. Pitt holding opposing offenses to 57% completion percentage, 10 INTs. 5 of them came last week against McCord. SMU, 12 INTs. I mean, it's amazing when you think about how good the defenses are for both of these teams. I've seen Narduzzi in this spot. I think Pitt is just a little bit more physical on the offense and defensive lines. I do believe in Holstein, even though they're on the road. I'm going to take this 7.5 points. Wouldn't shock me if they strike the upset.
The Panthers are a perfect 2-0 against the spread and outright as an underdog this year against Cincinnati and West Virginia, 2 power conference victories in non-conference play. Again, Pitt looking for its first 8-0 start since 1981. SMU responded from the BYU loss by winning 5 straight. They had covered in their first 4. Entering last week, they had a -6 turnover margin, but blocked a field goal late to force overtime in Durham against the Blue Devils and escape with a 1-point win. SMU last year in the American, a perfect 9-0, including that victory in a conference title game against Tulane. They won their final AAC game of 2022 under Rhett Lashley. This SMU team, regardless of league, has won 14 consecutive conference matchups. They're 3-1 against the number this year. And Kev, I think when you look at the quarterbacks in this matchup, Joe alluded to it. Both were slightly banged up in the most recent game for either club. Both expected to play. Kevin Jennings for SMU, 3 interceptions last week. Eli Holstein, a huge focus for Pitt. Pat Narduzzi, often an old-school, grind-it-out kind of guy, hires the 31-year-old Cade Bell as his offensive coordinator. Pitt goes from the worst-scoring offense in the ACC a season ago, averaging less than 21 points per game, now looking like a wagon, and a top 10 scoring offense in the country, a lot of it the freshman quarterback in Eli Holstein.
I know we're looking at the total differently. What I would say is, since I've labeled this the We Don't Believe You Bowl, it is essentially a bet, Ben, that one of these teams will prove that to be a correct thought process, where if our final score, 38-17, either direction, it narrowly sneaks under because one of them was not able to answer the call. I don't think this total is outlandish, but it is me suggesting that either Jennings or Holstein doesn't answer the bell in this matchup.
Eli Holstein, 301 yards or more in the first 4 games for Pitt against FBS foes, $133 or less in the last 2. I think he takes advantage of an SMU secondary today. Hour number 2 is up next.
Tatum has fixed that hitch. He now shoots it at the top of his jump. His release is really pure. And right now he's shooting it at 49% from 3. Now, I'm not saying he's going to shoot at 49% from 3 for the season. But if he's at 42, 43%, Lord have mercy, look out below. Jason Tatum, right now, my number 6 player in the NBA.
Betting above the rim. Only on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern